Hey there, I'm Lance.
I'm Jeremy.
And we are Hard to Master, where we take a look at games that are
hard to master,
such as
Frosthaven by Cephalofair Games. This is a giant game, if you haven't or can't tell. It weighs a lot, especially when you're carrying it one-handed to Lance's house. It's 30-something pounds. So this is the kind of sequel to Gloomhaven. They did have Jaws of the Lion. And this is the newest one, Frosthaven. And so we're going to not necessarily give you a full opinions video here. This is not a full review. What we wanted to do is, I've already given you a real review, kind of how we feel about the game. But I wanted to go and talk about some things you might want to think about or do before you start. Maybe some basics about the game. So if you've not played any of them, you might know a little bit about what's going on if you haven't looked into anything yet. And know, is this a game that I might enjoy? We are going to talk about things we've experienced over the first several scenarios. We are several scenarios in. But we don't want to give you that full review until we get about twice as far as we are into it. And we have been playing this quite a bit. So that may tell you something. But we're going to give you some tips as well. And then just initial thoughts on what we think so far into the campaign. So this is a campaign game.
Yes.
It is a very large campaign. The campaign, ultimately the book has about 137 scenarios, I believe. They're all going to start in this book that I have here, and we will have it upside down just so we can match up the picture with you so you can kind of see what we're talking about on frame. But let's go ahead and just talk about some of the basics of, what Frosthaven is, Lance. We're going to try and do this real quick, so we don't want a full rules teach,
right.
Just kind of what's going on.
So if you're familiar with Gloomhaven, Gloomhaven is a dungeon crawler, card-based game in which the hand of cards that you have, and everybody's deck of cards is different based upon what character you are in the game. Then you are using those cards, hand management. You're going to be playing 2 cards every round, and each card's going to have a number assigned to it. So out of the 2 cards you're using, you're picking one of the 2 numbers that are on those cards to be your initiative order. And whoever has the lowest number, they're going to activate first in a round. And the baddies in this game are also going to have their own initiative. And so it's not just going to be all the good guys go and then the bad guys go. It's going to be interspersed throughout each round, and it's going to change. And so you're not 100% sure when you're going to activate in a round, or when your compadres are going to activate, or when the bad guys are going to activate. But you're using those cards to basically move yourself on the map and do damage to the bad guys. And so that's how Gloomhaven operated. Frosthaven is the exact same system. You are still playing 2 cards. However, a lot of the different characters are going to have little nuances and other additional rules that kind of shake things up. Such as, for instance, I don't want to get in too many details, but for instance, your initiative's not so straightforward. It might be high, it might be low. You get to choose between 2 numbers. One particular character has 2 different decks that they're working with. One that's ranged and does only ranged attacks from far away, and one that only does melee attacks close up. And you have to switch back and forth between those 2 decks.
Or another character has a deck that has a fast and a slow speed, and whichever one they choose, they have to choose the same speed, quickness for each card. So it may be 2 fast cards or it may be 2 slow cards.
Yeah.
So the complexity will range based on the character that you choose. Every character is going to be different. Not only will they have different class type abilities, but they also have different words that are going to be on their board, which may interact with the story and help you with different things as you go. So right here we have the base scenario. So we're not throwing out any spoilers right now. This is a base level 0 scenario even before the campaign begins, just so we can show you kind of what it would look like. So if you look right here, it's going to have your scenario goal in the yellow. Once you do this, you will read the ultimate finale of that scenario. This gives you your introduction, and we'll talk about one thing that can maybe spice this game up a little bit for you when we go to tips and kind of things that we would recommend. In addition to that, in the purple you have special rules that you're going to be dealing with, and in your base scenario before the campaign, level 0, you will have these different things for your character, which will tell you how to set up your deck so you can get used to everything. If you've already played Gloomhaven or Jaws of the Lion, you may want to skip this. However, we've played it, and we still ended up doing this so that we could refamiliarize ourselves with it. In addition, down here on the bottom, you'll have your scenario key, which will have different baddies that you're going to put on the board. It's basically your iconography for what's over here, in addition to what loot cards you're going to put into the deck for whenever those monsters die.
Which that is a new thing added into Frosthaven. I'm pretty sure it used
to be just coins.
Yeah, it's not something that you found in Gloomhaven or Jaws of the Lion. So the loot is a totally different thing.
We will talk more about this in our kind of initial thoughts on the game. But like I said, so this will tell you the snow rock is here or the snow drift. Now over here it gives you the layout, and I do have this upside down. If I were to turn this board around here, it would line up perfectly, so why don't we do that? So we turn this around, it still fits on frame, and if you look, right here's where all your heroes start. Well, you're going to pick where you want each hero and put them there. Now, we have our campaign playing with 4 characters, so we do fill up all 4 spaces. Based on how many players, you're going to set that many up. So if I only had 2 players, because you're playing, even solo plays 2 players, you're not going to have this wolf here. You're not going to have this wolf here, but you will have a normal wolf or hound here. And then over here, if you're playing with 2 players, you would have a normal hound. But if you're playing with 3 players, then you start seeing these yellow boxes. Those tell you that they're an elite hound that's going to be there, or a monster that's going to be there. Anything in green you cannot go over. That's going to be your snow rock, and then purple's going to slow you down. That's a snow drift. So you have your setup, and you have your 1 here, which is the door. Now this is the initial setup. You look right here. This is the overall map layout. So I would need the 16A tile as well as the 13C tile, because once I open this door, I'm going to read this next part of the scenario. These section links tell you what you're reading next. And so once I open that door, or I want an in-depth play, like how to play guide like this, I can read this. But if I just open the door, I'm going to read this. That's always going to be there. And then you'll pull out this section book. So once I do that, I would pull out the section book, I would turn to this number, and I would read the next section. And the next section is going to tell you, once you open this next door, once you do this objective, then you're going to read this until you finish the whole thing and do that scenario goal. Now, most of the time, the scenario is going to ask you to wipe out everything in the room. Sometimes you'll have other things where you'll have to do these other objectives in addition or in place of. But once you complete that, you would read the finale. It might tell you to place stickers on the outpost board, which is another thing we'll talk about briefly in a second. But you may get different items or different resources that you can use for the outpost phase. Like we said, you're going to be using that deck to do the different things like moving, combat, and then other special abilities, maybe healing, maybe summoning different allies and creatures and things that you're going to have. And there may be some just generic allies that are in the scenario. So those are basics of how that scenario is going to go. Now, once that scenario is over and you read this, then, and you won't do this after scenario 0, let me preface that, but after you get into the campaign, you have the choice to continue on in your scenarios or to go back to the outpost phase. And you would go back, you do an outpost event. You're going to be hopefully building up places on your board, either to get these buildings better, to make actions better at these outpost actions through the buildings, or to maybe build up your defense for the wall so that you can protect against the different events that are going to come. In addition to that, you'll place new stickers on the board from your chaining different scenarios. So now I've unlocked more scenarios. The flow chart will allow me to place those stickers, and once I do that, then I'll put them on that outpost board and I can mark off the ones I've already completed.
Which that's very much a similar thing as what you saw in Gloomhaven and Jaws of the Lion. However, the outpost phase is something that is a new addition with Frosthaven. You had Towns phase in Gloomhaven, where you were making a decision as between if you wanted option A or option B, and it was a lot of cards. but it was a very small portion of Gloomhaven. Most of Gloomhaven was about the scenarios, and anything in between was mostly buying items or, again, picking an option A or option B kind of thing. The Outpost in Frosthaven is its own like mini game going on in between the major scenarios. And you're really doing an upkeep of an outpost. You're needing to spend your resources wisely, making a lot of decisions that will have future gameplay impact for later on down the road. And it's really a meatier portion of the game that you just don't really have in Gloomhaven.
Yeah, so once you do all those building actions and upgrading and building up your map and making sure all your stickers were placed, then you would go and do a road event and go out and do a new scenario.
Right.
Some scenarios are linked, so you cannot go back and outpost in between. And then some will have other things that you pick and choose. It kind of goes wherever you want. If you finish one, I could come and do this one now. So all the while you're filling out this campaign sheet, which I don't want to show too much because you might actually see a spoiler or something. So but you do have a campaign sheet where you're going to be marking, the flow of time and what resources you share with each other and all of that. So that is a very brief, 10-minute or so overview of what Frosthaven is. If you have not played Gloomhaven, Frosthaven, heard about it, or you're just trying to figure out, I've heard about it, but I don't know much about gameplay, there's a quick 10-minute blurb about it.
Yep.
So let's go into some things that maybe you want to do before starting a campaign, or maybe even purchasing the game. Thinking of some things that we're going to give you might be tips or ways to maybe better your experience.
Okay.
Do you want to throw out one and I can throw out some?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing that I would definitely recommend, and this has been the case since Gloomhaven ever came out, and that is organizing your game is vitally important. There are organizers for that. Folded Space makes a fantastic insert, not only for Gloomhaven, but Jaws of the Lion and now Frosthaven as well. It's pricey, but it's actually on the cheaper end for the inserts that you find for this particular game.
There are a bunch of companies that have inserts. I believe Broken Token, Tower Rex, or maybe Laser Rocks, but there's several for the box if you're wanting something to make it a little bit more organized and not have to place all 50 of these baggies with with bad guys on there. That's probably the most annoying thing for me, is stacking them.
Absolutely.
And then there's still a box left. I can never get the box flat.
And so one other thing that I would recommend too when it comes to organization, I've done this with Gloomhaven. This is Jeremy's copy of Frosthaven, so I don't own Frosthaven, but if I did own it, I would absolutely do this with that, and that is these board tiles. I don't actually keep in my game box. I have put everything into the insert except for the game tiles, and I keep the game tiles in a separate folio accordion file. That's what I'm looking for. And I've organized them as far as the different lettering system goes. That way I can easily find them. They don't take up any space inside my game box. The one downside of that is I have to find shelf space to put that accordion file, and I got to make sure if I'm going to take that game somewhere on a game night, I got to grab not only the box but the accordion file. But I'd rather that be the cumbersome part of it rather than throwing it all in the box, trying to organize the tiles every time I break it out. That to me is a lot better of a process. Getting the insert, getting the separate accordion file to keep these tiles arranged. That's something I feel like you got to do with this game.
And they do sell those too. So if you want something that looks nicer, you can get a Frosthaven map archive or accordion file. It's going to separate those based on the numbers. So that's one thing from you. I think another thing you need to do, and this is a must, I figured this out after a couple plays, is I told Lance, and this is number one. Number one, before you start a campaign of Gloomhaven, go ahead and tape the bottom of the box.
Yeah.
If you tape this bottom of the box when you're putting all the little tokens and cards in, they will not fall out.
Yeah.
Because it's already going to be packed full of items. And so it's already kind of bulging, but when you have this untaped, you will have things that want to slide out. So my number one thing for you after you've purchased it is to go ahead and at least tape the ones you're using or your base characters that you can trade out for. You can always tape the others later, but I would tape the base characters for sure.
Yeah.
You said, organization. I think organization of your party is a big thing for this game. If you want to play it solo, know you're playing 2 characters. If you're playing with 2 people or 3 people, that's going to be a little bit quicker of a game. I'll tell you, we are playing a 4-player campaign, and every 4-player game session so far has been almost 3 hours.
3.
And when you're looking at 3 players, it's about 2 to 2.5 hours. So it is definitely quicker when you are, thinking of if it's 3 versus 4, because you can still play your campaign and somebody just, maybe they didn't go out with your group that time in the story. So that's all good and dandy, but it will speed up the game because when you play with 4, it definitely will take almost 3 hours every scenario, and that's not even counting setup or outposts or teardown. Right. So that is one thing to remember because it's almost an hour a tile basically.
I'll also say with the setup and teardown and just general upkeeping of this game, it can be a beast. And if you're not used to that with just these types of games in general, or Gloomhaven or Jaws of the Lion is on a smaller scale version of the upkeeping and bookkeeping and all of that. But there is a lot of that going on with this type of game. And you can have player fatigue, let's call it, with these kind of games, in that it's hard to get the energy to want to bring a game like this to the table, knowing that there is such a teardown, setup and teardown and upkeeping portion of energy that goes into these kind of games. So one of the things that can really help out with that are getting the downloadable apps that you can find on your app store that will really help with the stat tracking and the upkeep with these types of games, and keeping track of the bad guys' stats and their health and their conditions and what activations they're doing this round, and keeping track of the elements on the weather board, and it does all of that for you. So highly recommend that be something that you seek out for you as you get into these types of games. Well-known services out there, well-known apps that do it really well, and so you need to definitely look at that for Frosthaven as well.
I will say I did download the app. We did have it out to start, but I know a lot of people rave about it. That's one thing that I did not really get into was the app.
I like the app.
I feel like the physical stat tracking was much easier for our group when you have 4 people. But if you're playing solo or 2 people, I can see how that is beneficial. Yeah. I just didn't find that it was as beneficial to me. Not to say that the app isn't good. We just found it was easier just to track it while we were in there on the app. But I will say, combining those 2 things as far as setup and apps, I actually set games up usually before everybody comes over so that it saves game time whenever we're there. Now, I will say when we do this, like I said, it's about 3 hours for 4 people. So when we do this, I try to get people there early. I have everything set up. One thing you can do is, we talked about it a little bit when reading this introduction, is you can download the Foreteller app and purchase the Foreteller dramatization of everything. It is about, I think, $15 or so, but I will tell you, it's much better than me reading it every time. I don't mind reading here and there, that's not my issue, but while that is reading to everybody, including me, and I'm listening, I can start to clear the board and maybe set up another scenario or the outpost. So it does help with setup and teardown, also giving you more experience. It is going to be more involved and get you engrossed into the theme thematic and the scenario. So that is another thing to think about. Another thing that you could do is you could paint your miniatures. Now, I usually paint most of the miniatures in my games, not all. Eventually, maybe they'll all be painted, but there's quite a few. But I did paint all these, and I did go through, not minding any spoilers for myself. I did go ahead and paint them all so that whenever we do unlock new characters, we can break them out, and we don't have to have one person that's not painted. Now, we're not going to show you all of the characters that are unlockable, but if you do want, you can go to Heart of Master Games on Instagram, and I do have spoiler shields, and you can go and look at all of our gameplay for this, and you can also look at the different miniatures that have been painted if you're wanting a reference for how to paint or a possibility. Maybe the image on there is some of the characters, their image doesn't give you a great reference to paint, and so you can see how I interpreted that, or maybe, you know, what I did, and then change it and find some techniques for how you want to paint it. So that's another thing.
And then on that note, one of the things that we found in our gameplays, just in the 8-9 scenarios that we've done so far,
something like that.
You don't have to stick with the same characters that you start off with. You don't have to keep playing them out till they're retired. You can swap them out, and you can try out new characters. And in fact, I would really encourage you to do that so you get an all-around experience of what this game has to offer, because the characters are just so vastly different from one another, and they're so different from what you find in Gloomhaven or Jaws of the Lion. There's a lot that this game has to offer that is different from Gloomhaven, and I would highly recommend you to try and experience as many of those things as you can with these characters as early on as you can with this game, because you'll find that if you don't really care for the tank character in this game, maybe it's a little too basic or a little too straightforward, and you try out one of the other characters that are more complex, there's going to be something there that will tie you in and draw you back to the game and reignite that passion for this game and have you keep coming back more and more. And then once maybe you've played that a few times, you want to try to experience another character, you can do that, and you can go to the other one. And maybe you know, somebody in your play group who, they're at the same point of wanting to try something new. Maybe you swap characters with that person. There's nothing in the game that says you have to stick with this particular character for the entire campaign. You don't have to do that. And so I would recommend that be something that you consider doing if you just feel like maybe you want to try something else new, or maybe it gets a little stale for you after so many plays. That can really reignite the passion for the game and open up some new things that you might not otherwise have experienced 30 plays into the game, and you're hours and hours and hours into the gameplay, and you're like, man, I should have started with this character a long time ago. I know that's how I felt even 9 scenarios into it.
I was going to say that for final thoughts, but that is one thing to remember, that when you're setting up your game, you don't have to necessarily play a character through retirement, we found out. One last thing I will say as far as things to think about or do before really getting too heavy into this game is I would say join different community groups like on Facebook or different social media like a Discord or Reddit for Frosthaven. That way when you do have questions or things, even if you post with a spoiler shield, people can answer that and help you through it, so you're not just walking through it blindly. So now let's kind of go into our thoughts of how we feel about everything so far. Like I said, we're getting pretty into it now, and we're starting to unlock and find new scenarios that are a little bit more enjoyable. I know our last scenario was probably everybody's most enjoyable, so let's get into our initial thoughts on it. Like I said, this is not a final thoughts or final review or score or anything like that. We're going to wait until we get about twice as far as where we are so we can give you a much better idea of that. But we do want to give you an idea of what we kind of think about it so far, like you might feel after several scenarios.
Yeah, I'll go first and let you guys know that Gloomhaven's probably my favorite dungeon crawler experience. And I loved it, played a ton of it. I didn't necessarily play everything that's in that box because, my goodness, there is a ton of content in that box. But that's my background. That's where I'm coming from. Somebody who absolutely loves Gloomhaven. And so having that as the background, when I heard Frosthaven and what it had to offer, I was ready to jump into it, wanted to experience it, wanted to see what it was different. And I'll tell you, this game does have a lot to offer that makes it different from Frosthaven. So to answer the question, do you need both of them? I'm going to tell you that if you absolutely really enjoy Gloomhaven, you like that experience, you like that universe, you like what it had to offer, you probably will want to check out Frosthaven to some extent. Does that mean you need to buy it? Maybe not. Maybe you can get into a play group with somebody who does own it and you can enjoy it with that person. Sure. But if you loved Gloomhaven, you'll probably loved Frosthaven. That's probably where I'm going to leave it at. So I do really like Frosthaven. Now I will say that I feel as though that Frosthaven maybe adds a lot more to the outside of the scenario elements, and if that's not something that you're too keen on, the whole outpost and the downtime between scenarios where we're kind of building up this upkeep, if that's not something that you're too keen on, then you just have to be aware that that's a thing. And you don't have to make that be such a big portion of the game night. You can say, okay, what do we want to spend resources on? Let's do it. Okay, let's go straight into the next episode. Like we can make it be that sort of thing, or you can make that be a bigger part of the game night. We really need to think about this scenario that's coming up. Maybe we should do this. Maybe we should do that. You can really strategize and work it out as a team. That's going to be something you got to figure out with your play group, what you want to do. Me, I'm more about let's get into these scenarios, let's keep going. So that was a little bit of a, not a mountain to climb necessarily, but that was something that I had to prepare myself for because you didn't really have that in Gloomhaven. So I will say it's maybe a little bit of a slower start than what Gloomhaven had. Gloomhaven, it felt like, boom, you were just going scenario, 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 whereas this one is a little more, here's a scenario with story. Let's build up the outpost. Here's a little bit more scenario. Now let's go back to the outpost. Like it's a little more back and forth.
And you can skip the outpost. You can just keep going and not outposts. So that's as often.
That's one thing that I would say you just be aware of. But all the other complexities that Frosthaven has to offer, the characters are so much more interesting. I feel like it really sort of feels like they said, we know Gloomhaven works, but let's find a way to reinvent it and take it to the next level. And they did that. So that's kind of my intro thoughts on the game.
Well, my initial thoughts so far are that I enjoy this a little bit more than my Gloomhaven plays, because I feel like Frosthaven is a little bit more cooperative. When we have played Gloomhaven, everybody's attacking things, but then one person is going and taking all the loot and they're using it to upgrade themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas in Frosthaven, the same thing happens. We do give Lance a very hard time for going to pick up loot all the time. But with Frosthaven, you're not upgrading your items as much. You are using them with each other to help that outpost phase. I do enjoy it. I know a lot of people don't like the outpost phase, and then there's people that do. I'm one of the people that do. I enjoy putting the stickers on the board. I enjoy working with everybody. Hey, we need this, this, this. Why don't we build this? I think this would be better. We'll be able to do this action better. Now look, now we have this big old, we had a little bitty hut. Now we have this big old building that extended our fence. And look at how it's upgraded the board. I really enjoy that part of it. It's not my favorite part of it, but I do enjoy that. I really like the card play in Frosthaven. It's just like Gloomhaven, though. I'm picking my initiative order and I'm playing it. And I want to try, a lot of times you'll want to be the fastest because you want to kill it, because you have these attack cards you're trying to complete during that scenario. And a lot of times it may say you're going to have to pick your slowest initiative every time. I like that one because I don't care. I'll go slow. I'll let y'all go fast and do whatever, and then I'll do whatever I need, because I'm going to get those check marks and try to level my character up. So there are those things about it where I can play off the scenario attack card that I'm trying to complete, so I can get those check marks, whether it's one check mark or two. And then if I feel like it's one, I got three that I'm not going to be able to do any, well, I just put that aside and play however I want, and oh well. So like Lance said, finding out that I can play a new character, because I did play with a turtling character, and it was a turtle for me to get through the rooms a lot of times. And when I'm doing this, I don't want to give away which character, but when I'm doing this on the board it's very tough to keep doing this because I'm limited by my cards. I can't do it very often, but if I want to have upgraded actions, I have to remove things. And it was very, it's complex, and I'm fine with complexity, and I was able to do a lot of what I wanted, but that did entail that I was slowly moving. Yeah. And a lot of times, I would just have, there were a couple times where I just had to stay alive and do basic actions so that I could keep my cards because y'all were dying. And so my slow turtle play of playing these cards for basic actions, all right, how do you have so many cards left? So I'm playing basic actions to keep my cards. I'm attacking people two hits at a time, and I'm taking people out, but it's a real grind. And so eventually finding out that I could play a new character and put that one away for a while, even though they started over on their leveling and everything, was nice because we had unlocked a new class. Well, I'm first one that gets to test that out. And it did bring a newness. When I play games, I say it all the time, I like to play different factions. I like to play different ways so I can learn a new character and a new way to play. I really enjoy the variety in games and being able to utilize that. And so being stuck with one character over multiple scenarios is really tough for me. Not that I hate a character, but eventually I get tired of a character and I want to play somebody new.
Right.
And so that's why, you know, one-off games or short campaign games like a Bloodborne or something is great for me because I can use that character 2 or 3 scenarios and then I'm done and I can pick a new one. Whereas this one, there's 137 scenarios that are going to branch and I'm going to be playing several, especially when my retirement cards are nowhere in sight. It's going to take forever for that character to retire, and so looking and knowing there's no light at the end of the tunnel for this person to retire so I can get a new one can be very draining, but knowing that I can get a new character and try them out, and eventually if I or somebody else wants to try them or swap, you can do that. So that definitely helps the experience and will bring that score back up a little bit from where it was after several plays because I was tired of a character. But knowing, you know, that change definitely has brought the score back up to where it initially would have been. So those are our initial thoughts on Frosthaven. Some different tips we can suggest for you that may be interested in this or recently purchased it, and how the game basically plays if you're just totally new to it. Again, we will be putting out another video probably later on this year where we've gone through about at least double where we are, maybe even farther, so that we can give you a true, honest opinion. But like I said, there is one scenario that we have found that we won't tell you where it is or where it branches, but there are puzzle scenarios in here. Yeah. And when you find a puzzle scenario, I would strongly recommend testing it out because the one that we just did was everybody in the campaign's favorite mission so far. Yeah. It was just a refreshing scenario and nice change to bring in. So we're really looking for more puzzles if we find them to see if they live up to that same thing. And so that's kind of what we think about Frosthaven. Feel free to comment down below if you think that there maybe is something we might have missed for a tip so people can see it and they can test that out as well. Hopefully you're looking forward to the final review of it that we give later this year.
If you like this video, make sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so that you'll know when that video comes out later on this year where we give our complete thoughts on this game. I'm Lance.
I'm Jeremy.
And we are Hard to Master, where we take a look at games that are hard to master. We'll catch you next time.
See ya.